The morning rain fell softly on the ancient stones of St. George's Chapel as mourners gathered for what would become one of the most talked-about royal funerals in recent memory. Queen Elizabeth's cousin, Lady Margaret Thornfield, had passed away at the age of 92, and the entire royal family was expected to attend this somber occasion. William adjusted his black tie one final time as he stepped out of the official car. The weight of royal duty pressed heavily on his shoulders, as it always did during such formal occasions. His wife, Catherine, walked beside him, her elegant black dress and hat perfectly appropriate for the solemn day ahead. Behind them, other members of the royal family emerged from their vehicles, each face wearing the expected mask of grief and respectfulness. But as William's eyes swept across the gathering crowd, he noticed something that made him pause mid-step. There, standing near the chapel entrance, was Camilla. She wore a sophisticated black ensemble, her silver hair perfectly styled beneath a small hat adorned with a dark veil. Everything about her appearance was exactly as it should be for such an occasion. Everything except her expression. While everyone else wore faces of mourning and solemnity, Camilla had the faintest trace of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It wasn't obvious, and William was certain that most people would miss it entirely. But he had spent years observing people at royal functions, learning to read the subtle expressions and hidden emotions that often lurked beneath the surface of formal occasions. The smile wasn't inappropriate or disrespectful. Instead, it seemed almost peaceful, as if Camilla knew something that brought her quiet satisfaction. William found himself studying her more carefully as they made their way toward the chapel entrance. What could possibly be causing such an expression at a funeral? Lady Margaret had been a beloved figure in royal circles, known for her sharp wit and generous spirit. She had never married, dedicating her life instead to charitable work and supporting various royal causes. Throughout her long life, she had been a trusted confidant to many family members, someone who could be counted on for honest advice and unwavering loyalty. As the family gathered in the chapel's antechamber before the service began, William positioned himself where he could continue observing Camilla without appearing obvious. She moved through the room with her usual grace, offering appropriate condolences to other family members and speaking in hushed, respectful tones. Yet that subtle smile never completely disappeared. Charles approached his son, placing a gentle hand on William's shoulder. "Quite a turnout for Aunt Margaret," he said quietly, his own face reflecting genuine sadness. "She would have been pleased to see so many people here to honor her memory." William nodded, but his attention remained partially focused on Camilla. She was now speaking with Princess Anne, and he noticed how Anne seemed completely at ease with her stepmother, showing no signs of detecting anything unusual about Camilla's demeanor. "Did you know Lady Margaret well?" William asked his father, genuinely curious about the woman they were gathering to honor. Charles smiled sadly. "Oh, yes, quite well. She was always around when I was growing up, had this remarkable ability to remember everyone's birthdays and favorite foods, never forgot a single detail about anyone she cared about. Camilla and she had grown quite close over the years, actually." This information made William even more intrigued. If Camilla and Lady Margaret had been close friends, then surely her death would warrant genuine grief, not this mysterious contentment he was observing. The chapel bells began to toll, signaling that the service was about to begin. The family members took their designated positions in the procession line. William found himself walking several places behind Camilla and Charles, which gave him the perfect vantage point to continue his observations. As they entered the chapel, the organ began playing a mournful hymn that echoed through the sacred space. The pews were filled with friends, distant relatives, and representatives from various charitable organizations that Lady Margaret had supported throughout her life. The atmosphere was appropriately solemn, with only the sound of quiet sobbing and the rustle of prayer books breaking the reverent silence. William settled into his seat and glanced around the chapel. The beautiful stained glass windows cast colorful patterns across the stone floor, and elaborate flower arrangements filled the air with the sweet scent of lilies and roses. At the front of the chapel, Lady Margaret's casket was adorned with a simple arrangement of white roses, her favorite flower. The Archbishop began the service with traditional prayers and readings. William tried to focus on the words being spoken, but his eyes kept drifting toward Camilla, who sat 2 rows ahead of him. From his position, he could see her profile clearly, and that enigmatic expression remained unchanged. During the first hymn, something caught William's attention. As the congregation sang "Amazing Grace," one of Lady Margaret's favorite songs, he noticed Camilla's lips moving along with the words. But there was something different about the way she was singing. While everyone else's voices carried the expected sadness and mourning, Camilla seemed to be singing with a kind of joy that was completely at odds with the occasion. William leaned slightly forward, straining to hear her voice above the others. What he heard confirmed his suspicions. Camilla wasn't just singing the hymn. She was singing it with genuine happiness, as if she were celebrating rather than mourning. The service continued with readings from Lady Margaret's favorite Bible passages and a eulogy delivered by one of her godchildren. The speaker shared touching stories about Lady Margaret's generosity and kindness, her love of gardening, and her legendary tea parties where she would gather friends and family to share gossip and laughter. As these warm memories were shared, William noticed that Camilla's smile became slightly more pronounced. She nodded appreciatively at certain stories, and once or twice he was certain he saw her suppress what might have been a quiet laugh. Her behavior was becoming more puzzling by the moment. During the final hymn, "Abide with Me," something extraordinary happened. As the congregation sang the familiar words about finding comfort in times of darkness, William saw Camilla reach into her small black purse and withdraw what appeared to be a letter. The paper looked old and yellowed, as if it had been kept for many years. Camilla held the letter carefully, not opening it, but simply touching it gently with her gloved fingers. The action was so subtle that William was certain no one else noticed it. But from his position, he could see the way her face transformed as she held that mysterious letter. The peaceful smile he had observed all morning suddenly made perfect sense, though he still had no idea what the letter contained. As the service concluded and the family began to file out of the chapel for the burial ceremony, William found himself burning with curiosity. What was in that letter? Why had Camilla brought it to the funeral, and why did holding it seem to bring her such obvious comfort and satisfaction? The burial took place in the small cemetery adjacent to the chapel, where many members of the extended royal family had been laid to rest over the years. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained overcast, lending an appropriately somber atmosphere to the proceedings. As the casket was lowered into the ground, William watched Camilla once more. She stood with her head bowed respectfully, but that letter remained clutched in her hand. Whatever it contained, it was clearly precious to her, and somehow connected to Lady Margaret in a way that brought her joy rather than sorrow. After the burial, the family and close friends gathered for a reception at a nearby estate that had been one of Lady Margaret's favorite places to visit. The atmosphere began to lighten somewhat as people shared fond memories and celebrated the long, well-lived life they had just honored. William mingled politely with the other guests, but his attention remained focused on solving the mystery of Camilla's behavior. He watched as she moved through the reception, still carrying that letter, still wearing that enigmatic smile that seemed to grow slightly brighter whenever someone mentioned Lady Margaret's name. As the afternoon wore on, William realized that he wasn't the only one who had noticed something unusual about Camilla's demeanor. Catherine had moved to his side and was also observing his stepmother with curious eyes. "She seems unusually happy for someone who just attended a funeral," Catherine murmured quietly, her voice carrying a note of confusion. William nodded. I've been watching her all day. There's definitely something going on that we're not seeing." Before Catherine could respond, they overheard a conversation between Camilla and one of Lady Margaret's longtime friends, an elderly woman named Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield. "Margaret always said you were her favorite," Mrs. Whitfield was saying to Camilla. "She spoke of you so fondly, especially in those last few weeks. She was so pleased that she had been able to—" The woman's voice trailed off as she noticed other people listening. Camilla's smile grew warmer. "Margaret was a treasure," she said simply. "I'm just grateful that we had the chance to become so close. She gave me something very precious, something I'll always cherish." William exchanged glances with Catherine. This was clearly connected to whatever Camilla was hiding, but they were no closer to understanding what it might be. As the reception began to wind down and family members started taking their leave, William made a decision. He would find a way to learn the truth about Camilla's mysterious letter and her unusual behavior at the funeral. Something important had happened between Camilla and Lady Margaret, something that had brought his stepmother great joy even in the midst of mourning. Whatever that secret was, William was determined to discover it. The peaceful smile on Camilla's face suggested that Lady Margaret had left behind more than just fond memories. She had left behind something that had the power to bring happiness to those she loved, even from beyond the grave. As William and Catherine prepared to leave the reception, he took one last look at Camilla. She was standing by a window, looking out at the garden where Lady Margaret had spent so many happy hours. The letter was still in her hand, and her expression was one of profound gratitude and contentment. Whatever Lady Margaret had given Camilla, it was clearly something that would change everything, and William was more determined than ever to discover what that something might be. 3 days after Lady Margaret's funeral, William found himself unable to concentrate on his usual royal duties. The image of Camilla's mysterious smile and that carefully guarded letter kept returning to his mind. He had tried to dismiss his curiosity as inappropriate nosiness, but something deeper was driving his need to understand what had transpired between his stepmother and the late Lady Margaret. The opportunity to learn more came sooner than expected. Charles had asked William to join him for lunch at Clarence's house to discuss upcoming engagements, and William knew that Camilla would likely be there as well. Perhaps he could find a tactful way to bring up the subject of Lady Margaret without appearing too obvious. When William arrived at Clarence's house, he found Charles in his study reviewing correspondence. The room smelled of leather and old books, creating the comforting atmosphere that Charles had always preferred for conducting business. "Ah, William," Charles said, looking up from his papers. "Perfect timing. I've just been going through some of Aunt Margaret's personal effects. She left specific instructions about how certain items should be distributed among family members." William's pulse quickened. This was exactly the opening he had been hoping for. "That was thoughtful of her. I imagine she had quite a few treasured possessions after such a long life." "Indeed," Charles nodded. "She was remarkably organized about it all. Left detailed lists of who should receive what, along with personal notes explaining the significance of each item. Camilla has been helping me sort through everything." At that moment, Camilla entered the study carrying a tea tray. She had changed from her morning attire into a soft, cream-colored cardigan and appeared more relaxed than William had seen her in days. Most notably, she still carried that same peaceful expression that had puzzled him at the funeral. "I thought you both might enjoy some tea while you work," Camilla said, setting the tray down on Charles's desk. As she arranged the cups and saucers, William noticed that she moved with an unusual lightness, as if some invisible burden had been lifted from her shoulders. "Camilla was just telling me about her final visit with Aunt Margaret," Charles said, accepting his teacup gratefully. "Apparently, they had quite a meaningful conversation just a week before Margaret passed away." William saw this as his chance. That must have been comforting for both of you. Lady Margaret always seemed like someone who chose her words carefully." Camilla's hand paused for just a moment as she poured William's tea, and he caught a glimpse of that same enigmatic smile he had observed at the funeral. "She certainly did," Camilla agreed. "Margaret had a way of knowing exactly what someone needed to hear, even if they didn't realize it themselves." "She left something special for you, didn't she?" William asked gently, hoping he wasn't overstepping boundaries. "I couldn't help but notice at the funeral that you seemed to have something that brought you comfort." Camilla set down the teapot and looked directly at William. For a moment, he thought she might deflect his question or change the subject entirely. Instead, she seemed to consider her words carefully before responding. "Margaret did leave me something precious," she said finally. "Something that I never expected to receive. But which means more to me than I can adequately express." Charles looked up from his papers with interest. "You haven't told me the details yet. I know she left you her mother's pearls, but you mentioned there was something else." Camilla walked to the window and gazed out at the garden, where early spring flowers were beginning to bloom. William could see that she was weighing how much to reveal about Lady Margaret's final gift. "The pearls are lovely, of course," Camilla said slowly, "but what Margaret really gave me was something I thought I had lost forever. Something I believed was gone from my life permanently." William felt his curiosity intensify. Whatever Lady Margaret had done for Camilla, it had clearly been life-changing. The transformation in his stepmother's demeanor was remarkable, and it had all begun with that mysterious letter she had carried at the funeral. "Would you be willing to share what it was?" William asked respectfully. "I don't mean to pry, but I could tell at the funeral that whatever Margaret had done for you brought you great happiness." Camilla turned back to face both men, and William saw that her eyes were bright with unshed tears. But these weren't tears of sadness. They seemed to be tears of overwhelming gratitude and joy. "Margaret returned something to me that I thought was lost 30 years ago," Camilla said quietly. "Letters. A collection of letters that I had written to my first love when I was very young, before I married Andrew Parker Bowles." William felt his breath catch. He knew that Camilla's romantic history before her relationship with his father was a topic that was rarely discussed openly within the family. The idea that Lady Margaret had somehow preserved letters from Camilla's youth was both surprising and deeply touching. "How did Lady Margaret come to have your letters?" Charles asked gently, clearly moved by the emotion in his wife's voice. Camilla returned to her seat and clasped her hands in her lap. "It's a long story, one that I haven't shared with anyone in decades. When I was 19, I fell deeply in love with a young man named David Ashworth. He was studying to become a doctor, and I was completely captivated by his intelligence and kindness." She paused to sip her tea, clearly gathering her thoughts before continuing. "We wrote to each other constantly when we were apart. I must have sent him hundreds of letters over the course of our 2-year relationship. They were filled with all the hopes and dreams and silly romantic notions that young people have when they believe their love will conquer everything." William found himself leaning forward, drawn into this unexpected glimpse into Camilla's past. He had never heard her speak so openly about her life before she became part of the royal family. "What happened to the relationship?" William asked softly. "David's parents disapproved of me," Camilla said with a slight smile. "They thought I was too frivolous, too focused on social events rather than serious pursuits. They convinced him to break off our engagement and focus on his medical studies instead." Charles reached over and took Camilla's hand. "That must have been devastating." "It was," Camilla acknowledged. "But what made it worse was that David returned all of my letters to me when he ended our relationship. He said it would be too painful for him to keep them. I was so heartbroken and angry that I did something incredibly foolish." William waited, sensing that they were approaching the heart of the story. "I took all of those letters and burned them in the fireplace of my family's country house," Camilla continued. "I wanted to erase every trace of what I thought had been a foolish mistake. I was young and dramatic, and it seemed like the right thing to do at the time." "But they weren't all destroyed?" Charles guessed. Camilla shook her head, and that mysterious smile returned to her face. "Unknown to me, my younger sister Sarah had rescued several of the letters from the fire. She thought I was making a terrible mistake by destroying them, so she secretly saved about 20 of them." "And somehow Lady Margaret ended up with these letters?" William asked, beginning to understand the connection. "Sarah and Margaret became close friends when they were both involved in the same charitable organization," Camilla explained. "When Sarah was diagnosed with cancer 15 years ago, she gave the letters to Margaret for safekeeping. She made Margaret promise to give them back to me someday, when the time was right." William felt a wave of understanding wash over him. And Lady Margaret decided that now was the right time. "During our final visit, Margaret told me that she had been carrying this secret for years," Camilla said. "She had watched me grow and change, had seen me find happiness with your father, and she believed that I was finally at a place in my life where I could read those letters without pain." Charles squeezed Camilla's hand. "Were you able to read them?" Camilla nodded, and her smile became radiant. "I read them all the night after the funeral. William, you can't imagine what it was like to see my own handwriting from 30 years ago, to remember the young woman I used to be. Those letters contained so much hope and joy and pure, uncomplicated love." William felt his throat tighten with emotion. That must have been incredibly moving. "It was more than that," Camilla said. "Reading those letters reminded me of dreams I had forgotten I once had. They showed me that the capacity for that kind of pure happiness has always been part of who I am, even during the difficult years when I felt like I had lost myself completely." The room fell silent for a moment, as all three of them absorbed the significance of Lady Margaret's final gift. William began to understand why Camilla had appeared so peaceful at the funeral. She hadn't been mourning just the loss of a friend. She had been celebrating the return of a part of herself that she thought was gone forever. "There's more to the story," Camilla said quietly. "Margaret didn't just return the letters. She also gave me some information that I never expected to receive." William looked up with renewed interest. "She told me that David Ashworth has been following my life from a distance all these years," Camilla continued. "He never married, and he became a very successful pediatric surgeon. Margaret had stayed in touch with his family, and she knew that he had always wondered what became of me." Charles raised his eyebrows. "Did Margaret give you his contact information?" Camilla reached into her cardigan pocket and withdrew a small piece of paper. "She gave me his address and telephone number. She said that if I ever wanted to reconnect with him as a friend, she thought he would welcome the opportunity to apologize for how their relationship ended." William felt his mind racing with the implications. "Are you planning to contact him?" "I've been thinking about it constantly since the funeral," Camilla admitted. "Not because I want to rekindle any romantic feelings, but because those letters reminded me of the person I was when I was with him. I was confident and optimistic and completely unafraid of the future." She looked at Charles with obvious love and devotion. "I have no desire to change my life now. I'm happier than I've ever been. But there's something appealing about the idea of making peace with that chapter of my past, of letting David know that I harbor no ill feelings about what happened between us." Charles smiled warmly at his wife. "I think that sounds like a wonderful idea. Margaret was right to trust you with this gift when she did." William found himself deeply moved by the entire story. Lady Margaret's final act of friendship had been to give Camilla the opportunity to heal old wounds and reclaim lost parts of herself. No wonder his stepmother had been smiling at the funeral. She had been celebrating not just Margaret's life, but the restoration of her own sense of wholeness. "I understand now why you seemed so peaceful at the funeral," William said. "Lady Margaret didn't just leave you letters. She gave you back a piece of your history." Camilla nodded. "That's exactly right. For the first time in 30 years, I feel like I know the complete story of my own life. There are no more missing chapters or unanswered questions about who I might have been if things had gone differently." As William prepared to leave Clarence House that afternoon, he reflected on what he had learned about the power of friendship and the importance of preserving memories. Lady Margaret's decision to hold on to those letters for 15 years, waiting for the perfect moment to return them, was an extraordinary act of love and wisdom. But even more impressive was Camilla's willingness to share this deeply personal story with him and Charles. It had given William new insight into his stepmother's character and a deeper appreciation for the journey that had led her to find happiness with his father. The mystery of Camilla's smile at the funeral had been solved, but William realized that the real revelation was understanding the depth of compassion and healing that could flow from one person's thoughtful final gift to another. 2 weeks had passed since Camilla shared the story of Lady Margaret's extraordinary gift, and William found himself thinking frequently about the conversation. The image of his stepmother holding those precious letters at the funeral had taken on new meaning, and he felt a deeper respect for both women involved in this touching story. What William didn't expect was to receive a phone call from Camilla on a quiet Thursday evening, asking if he might have time to join her for tea the following day. There was something in her voice that suggested she had more to share about Lady Margaret's legacy. When William arrived at Clarence House the next afternoon, he found Camilla waiting for him in the garden room, surrounded by afternoon sunlight and the gentle fragrance of early blooming roses. She appeared more radiant than he had seen her in months, with a glow that seemed to come from deep inner contentment. "Thank you for coming," Camilla said, gesturing for him to take a seat across from her. "I wanted to tell you what happened after our conversation last week. I think you'll find it as remarkable as I do." William settled into his chair, intrigued by the obvious excitement in Camilla's voice. "Did you decide to contact David Ashworth?" Camilla smiled. "I did indeed. But what happened next was far more extraordinary than anything I could have imagined." She reached for a manila envelope that was sitting on the table beside her teacup. From it, she withdrew several sheets of paper covered in unfamiliar handwriting. "After thinking about it for several days, I finally worked up the courage to call David," Camilla began. "I was terribly nervous, unsure of how he might react to hearing from me after all these years. When he answered the phone and I told him who I was, there was such a long silence that I was certain he was going to hang up." William leaned forward with interest. "But he didn't?" "No, he didn't," Camilla said, her smile growing brighter. "Instead, he started to cry. Right there on the telephone, this distinguished 70-year-old surgeon began weeping like a child. He told me that he had been hoping for 30 years that he might have the chance to apologize to me for how terribly he had handled our breakup." William felt his own emotions stirring at the image of this long-delayed reunion. "That must have been incredibly moving for both of you." "It was," Camilla agreed. "But William, that was just the beginning. When I told David that I had recently received some of my old letters back, he became very quiet. Then he asked me if I might be willing to meet him for coffee, because he had something he wanted to show me." Camilla paused to sip her tea, clearly savoring the memory of what had happened next. "We met 3 days ago at a small cafe in Cotswolds. Neutral territory where we were unlikely to be recognized or disturbed. David looked wonderful, distinguished, and kind, exactly as I had always imagined he would age. But what shocked me was what he brought to our meeting." She held up the papers she had withdrawn from the envelope. "David had kept every single letter I had ever written to him. William felt his eyes widen in surprise. He kept your letters all these years? Everyone, Camilla confirmed. While I was burning my copies in a fit of youthful drama, David was carefully preserving his copies in a wooden box that he has carried with him through 7 different moves over the past 30 years. William shook his head in amazement. That's incredible. Why did he keep them? That's exactly what I asked him, Camilla said. His answer was one of the most touching things I've ever heard. He said that even though his parents had convinced him that our relationship wasn't practical, he never stopped believing that what we had shared was real and beautiful. He kept the letters as proof that he had once been capable of inspiring that kind of love in another person. William felt a lump forming in his throat. What a gift to have both perspectives on the same relationship preserved all these years. But that's not even the most remarkable part of the story, Camilla continued. When David learned that I had lost my copies of the letters in that impulsive fire, he immediately offered to have photocopies made of his entire collection. He said he wanted me to have the complete record of our correspondence, not just the few letters that my sister had managed to save. Camilla spread several of the photocopied letters across the table. William could see both his stepmother's youthful handwriting and David's careful responses, creating a dialogue between 2 young people who had been deeply in love 30 years ago. Reading these letters together, comparing my memories with his, has been like discovering a completely new story, Camilla explained. I had forgotten so many details about our relationship, so many small moments that seemed insignificant at the time, but which David had treasured enough to preserve in his responses. William picked up one of the letters and began reading David's careful script. The young man's voice came through clearly in his words, full of intelligence, warmth, and obvious devotion to Camilla. It was easy to see why she had fallen in love with him. What I find most moving is how different our perspectives were on the same events, Camilla continued. In my letters, I was always worried about whether I was smart enough for him, whether I could live up to his serious academic interests. But in his letters, he was constantly reassuring me that my joy and spontaneity were exactly what he needed in his life. She pointed to a particular passage in one of David's letters. Look at this. I had written to him worrying that I wasn't intellectual enough because I preferred novels to medical journals. His response was to tell me that my love of stories and characters was one of the things he admired most about me, because it showed him a way of understanding people that his scientific training couldn't provide. William read the passage and felt touched by the young man's obvious affection and respect for Camilla. It sounds like you both failed to appreciate what the other person valued most about you. Exactly, Camilla agreed. If we had been able to communicate more clearly back then, if we had been brave enough to stand up to his parents' disapproval, our story might have had a very different ending. William looked up from the letters. Do you regret that it didn't? Camilla was quiet for a moment, considering the question carefully. That's something I've been thinking about constantly since our coffee meeting. The honest answer is no, I don't regret it. If things had gone differently with David, I would never have married Andrew, never had Tom and Laura, never eventually found my way to your father. She paused, her expression becoming thoughtful. But what I do feel is a profound gratitude that I now understand the complete story. For 30 years, I carried a sense of failure about that relationship. I believed that David had realized I wasn't worthy of his love, and that left me with doubts about my own value that influenced every relationship I had afterward. William felt a wave of understanding. And now you know, that wasn't true at all. Now I know that he loved me exactly as I was, Camilla said. Reading his letters, seeing how he wrote about me to his friends, understanding how difficult it was for him to give me up, has healed something in me that I didn't even realize was still wounded. She gathered the letters back into a neat stack. David and I spent 4 hours talking that day. We shared stories about our children, our careers, our marriages, our losses. It was like catching up with the dearest friend I had ever had. William smiled. And how did you leave things with him? We've agreed to stay in touch as friends, Camilla said. David is planning to retire from surgery next year, and he's been invited to lecture at several medical schools about pediatric care. He mentioned that he might be in London periodically, and I told him he would always be welcome to visit. William felt a moment of concern. How does my father feel about this renewed friendship? Camilla's smile became radiant. Charles has been absolutely wonderful about the entire situation. When I told him about my meeting with David, he said he was delighted that I had found closure with such an important chapter of my past. He even suggested that we might invite David and his children to one of our summer gatherings. William felt a rush of admiration for his father's generosity and security in his relationship with Camilla. That's remarkably gracious of him. Your father understands something that took me years to learn, Camilla said. The people we love before we meet each other don't diminish our current love. They help create the person who is capable of loving deeply. David helped shape me into someone who could eventually appreciate and deserve the happiness I've found with Charles. William picked up another of the letters, this one in Camilla's youthful handwriting. He could see the joy and hope radiating from every line. The complete trust in love that only young people possess. What strikes me most about this whole story is Lady Margaret's wisdom in knowing when to return these letters to you, William said. She understood that you needed to be in a secure, happy place before you could revisit this part of your past without it causing pain. Camilla nodded thoughtfully. Margaret told me during our final visit that she had been waiting for the right moment for 15 years. She said she knew it was time when she saw how completely at peace I had become with my life choices. William felt moved by the older woman's patience and insight. She gave you a gift that kept giving. That's exactly right, Camilla agreed. But I think the most valuable thing Margaret gave me wasn't the letters themselves. It was the understanding that our past loves and losses don't have to remain sources of pain or regret. They can become sources of gratitude and wisdom if we're brave enough to revisit them with mature eyes. As William prepared to leave that afternoon, he reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had begun with Lady Margaret's decision to preserve a secret for 15 years. The elderly woman's final act of friendship had not only returned precious memories to Camilla, but had also facilitated a healing that rippled outward to affect multiple relationships. Thank you for sharing this with me, William said as they walked toward the door. It's given me a new appreciation for the power of preserving memories and the importance of timing in healing old wounds. Camilla hugged him warmly. I wanted you to understand the complete story because you're the one who noticed something different about me at the funeral. Your curiosity led to conversations that I might never have had otherwise. As William drove home that evening, he thought about the smile he had observed on Camilla's face during Lady Margaret's funeral service. At the time, it had seemed mysterious and inappropriate. Now he understood that it had been the expression of someone who had just received an unexpected gift of healing and wholeness. Lady Margaret's legacy would live on not just in the charitable organizations she had supported or the family members she had loved, but in the quiet miracle of two people finding peace with their past and friendship in their present. Her wisdom in knowing when and how to return those precious letters had created a ripple effect of healing that would continue to touch lives for years to come. The mystery of Camilla's unexpected smile had been solved, but William realized that the real story was about the extraordinary power of friendship, forgiveness, and the perfect timing of grace. Lady Margaret had understood that some gifts are too precious to give too soon and too important to take to the grave. In her final act of love, she had given Camilla not just letters but the completion of her own story and the peace that comes with understanding that every chapter of our lives has value, even the ones that seemed to end in sadness. William smiled as he thought about David Ashworth carefully preserving those letters for 30 years. Never knowing that Lady Margaret was doing the same with the other half of the correspondence, two people, separated by misunderstanding and circumstance, had unknowingly collaborated across decades to preserve something beautiful. And now, through the wisdom of a remarkable woman who understood the power of perfect timing, that beauty had been restored and transformed into something even more precious, the gift of complete understanding and lasting friendship. The story that had begun with a puzzling smile at a funeral had become a testament to the enduring power of love in all its forms, and the extraordinary ways that people can continue to care for each other across time, distance, and even death.